Thank you. I'm Anna Iltis. I'm in the philosophy department and the Center for Bioethics, Health and Society. And thank you for being with us until the end. And really thank you to all of the organizers and everybody who did so much to put this together, and the panelists for a really enriching and inspiring afternoon and evening. So given the impossible task of being respondents to this entire day, I'm going to hold my comments to the end and invite my co-panelists to introduce themselves and to reflect on, given the wide-ranging discussion today, thinking of yourselves as neuroscientists, as educators, as parents, what are you most curious about? Or what questions do you think we should all still be asking? And I'll invite Dr. Maya Opendock from Johns Hopkins to start us off, and Dr. Kingashida.
Thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm an assistant professor at Kennedy Krieger Institute and Johns Hopkins, and I want to open with something that sets me apart, maybe not from everyone here, but I do study rats. That's the primary work that I do, and there's not a ton of research on screen time in rats, but some people are actually using screens to teach rats these days, which is just sort of interesting. But really the work that I do asks the question, how does the social brain develop? And especially the period of time I'm focused on, or my lab's focused on, is infancy and early childhood. The rat correlates of that, and the importance of interactions with the caregiver during that highly vulnerable period. So the interactions with the caregiver, sculpting the brain to be adaptively social as that individual continues to evolve socially throughout life. So the social behavior that's adaptive when you're an infant is not the same when you're a child or an adolescent. So there's that built-in flexibility, and the research we do asks the question, there's this period of vulnerability, plasticity, because they need to be able to constantly be changing their social behavior. It's also a period when the environment, in particular, stressful experiences can change those circuits as they're being built. So I kept thinking during this, I'm very honored to be here, and I kept thinking, what can I bring to bear on this conversation? And of course the work that we do is translationally grounded and clinically relevant, because we study, a lot of things, but also early life stress, largely early life stress. And so I see things through that lens. And in listening to the speakers today, I heard a lot of, there's kind of a pattern, and there's some things that not to reduce anything, but I just think there's some points that kept coming up. And this came up with television before, and then there was one of the early speakers brought up how play has become less imaginative now than when they observe children. And these could be impacts of increased screen time, but I also remembered that a literature professor that I had said that even children's literature was becoming less imaginative, or it decreased the amount of imagination that children were using because it was just so descriptive. And so then we think, is this, or the panel we just listened to, where Dr. Telzer was talking about, both speakers were talking about how you open a brand new iPhone, you start getting this inundation of toxic content, and social comparison being really something that the teens are doing. So I remember when I was growing up, I was also, I told my parents I wanted to study media literacy, and this is before social media was even a thing, because I was like, oh, young women are getting so many horrible messages from the media about them needing to be thin and how they should make themselves smaller. And so I'm not saying that to reduce the harm that these companies, and I believe that they are doing, and the importance of regulation, but it seems to be accelerating a process that just is going on. And with, and there's going to be bigger systems at play that need to be held accountable for that, but it seems like what I took away from this is, okay, let's go back to this, what can we do? Let's say we can't even go outside 20 years from now, if there's, if things keep going the way they are. There's no touching grass, it's gonna be more and more and more. And these same problems, self-comparison could be a problem, it's just accelerated, or self-harm, or loneliness. What can we do about it? And I don't know the answer, of course, but go back to my research where we look at, okay, the most important thing that seems to come out is that children need a stable environment, whether they're children who are two-legged or four-legged. They need a stable, supportive environment with a caregiver, which again was brought up earlier. And the caregiver doesn't have to be a biological parent. It can be, you can have a chosen family, but basically a stable, supportive environment that's non-judgmental, that even when there are stressors, that you work through them together. And it seems that, again, bringing up a theme that came up earlier today, not to stigmatize parents and blame them more and hold them more responsible for everything. I think that one thing we get from our research, so we study early life scarcity adversity. So if you limit a mother rat's bedding resources, it causes her to roughly handle her pups, and this reliably changes their brain and their behavior. But this is not to say, okay, poverty causes child abuse. Let's stigmatize parents even further. It's let's make sure parents have the resources they need to be able to self-regulate and help their children self-regulate. And again, I'm kind of jumping around, but giving children opportunities to self-regulate and not saying, okay, we're going to take away all stressors, we're going to take away all sources of anxiety. Nobody can do that, but maybe working through those together, whether it's at the dinner table or even if it is something where you're both engaging in digital content, if that's what it has to be, as long as I think attunement between the caregiver and the parent, between the child and the caregiver seems like a really important way forward, regardless of the context, if it's analog or it's digital.
Well said. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. So my name is Ken Kishida. I'm the Boswell Presidential Chair in Neuroscience and Society here at Wake Forest. My research is in human neuroscience, the neurobiology of reward processing, decision-making, specifically value-based decision-making, and the role that dopamine plays in evaluating those outcomes and teaching the brain what to do next, right? My work has been supported by the National Institute of Mental Health, National Institute of Drug Abuse, other NIH institutes. And I just say this because a lot of my work does touch on to mechanisms of addiction. I'm also a father of 3 wonderful children. Fortunately, they're quite healthy. A 12-year-old, 15-year-old, and 17-year-old grew up, on screens and navigating that environment, with me and their mother by their side, and interacting and talking. So I really resonate with some of the processes there. That is very much an intentional lifestyle. So one more thing to add to my list of things that I do. I should disclose that I have been a consultant and expert witness for social media defendants in ongoing litigation. When I took on that role, I made it clear that I didn't know what the answers were to the questions that they wanted me to answer. But I did have expertise in the role that dopamine plays in decision-making and learning, the role that it plays in addiction to substances of abuse, and that if they valued my opinion, regardless of the outcome of my research and reports that I generated for them, then I'd be happy to take on that role and provide them what I interpreted the science to be. So just to comment on the panels today, there's some tremendous insights and tremendous discussions that I thought were really, really important that we should be having. I would push back on the notion of social media addiction. I think there is a philosophical difference in say, maybe the mechanisms that we investigate these topics from a neurobiological standpoint. And from what I understand, the kind of definition of social media addiction to be, there are significant differences, right? So a lot of what you'll read, and certainly the popular media around the notion of the concept of social media addiction, draws parallels, and I think it was mentioned earlier, to the mechanisms that are at play in opiates or nicotine or other substances of abuse. And the common thread that's used to connect those processes to what's called social media addiction is the role that the dopamine system plays, right? You get the dopamine rush, all right? So I study the dopamine rush, or at least the measurement of dopamine being released in the human brain when you receive rewards. And these could be monetary rewards in the context of simple gambling tasks or probabilistic kind of learning decisions. We've also looked at it in the context of a variety of other stimuli, including social interaction and interaction through screens and various kinds of stimuli. For decades, dopamine has been studied through the National Institute of Drug Abuse for its role in substance use disorder. Almost to the point that you might come away with the idea that dopamine's whole reason for existence is to addict you to everything that might release it, right? And that's just not the case, right? So substances of abuse, whether it be cocaine, opiates, nicotine, you name it, they get access to the brain that nothing else really that engages the dopamine system can. It goes through the blood-brain barrier, and it's directly affecting these systems and really short-circuiting systems that are meant to process natural rewards. So the idea that a dopamine release or a reward signal in your brain is an addictive signal is simply not true. Right now, hopefully, I'm engaging your dopamine system. And since you're mostly all awake, I think I'm doing so, right? If I took away your dopamine system, you'd either fall asleep or become Parkinsonian, right? So dopamine isn't the key here. Now the content issues and the kind of systems that are at play here are also really, really complicated. There's no doubt there's a strong association between mental health and social media use, screen use, and adolescence, right? The association is there. I'd like to remind that there's an association that was observed before between vaccines and two-year-olds getting vaccines and autism, right? That association of when symptoms of autism come on at that 2-year-old toddler range is highly associated with when you get vaccines. Right, the science has proved out that that's not causing autism, but there is this association that much of the press reported on, that was reported on and kind of led to these ideas that vaccines were harmful. And that science has just not bear fruit. So if we're getting into kind of the negatives and the associations that are observed and there are harms that we're worried about, what I'm most curious about is what's really going on, right? There's association studies, but they're not causation. It's not clear why kids are going to the social media in the context of the mental health that they have and the repercussions of that. It's not clear what alternatives they have access to. Definitely don't want to villainize or stigmatize parents. But it's not just the social media companies that are at issue here. The companies that the parents work for, providing health care, providing daycare, childcare, resources for parents to be with their families to support their children and to be together and avoid the stresses that we all experiences, right? In the workplace, having to answer your email at 10 o'clock at night is ridiculous, right? We shouldn't be working 24 hours around the clock for your employer. There ought to be limits, there ought to be boundaries. And so there's a very broad system, a lot of things going on involved that make living today challenging, right? So I'd love to know more about how we navigate this, while at the same time leveraging the powers that devices provide us, right? Being able to access our families, our employers, any time of the day, if that's what's needed. The information that's available to us. One of the strongest signals that activate the dopaminergic system in humans and in animals is new information, right? And if you think about what the devices provide us, it's a window to access information from all over the world. That's a tremendous power. Sometimes power can be harmful. And so I think there's real consideration that we need to take into account as we kind of navigate these challenges.
Thank you so much to both of you. I am not a neuroscientist. I'm a philosopher. And I think one of the things that was so interesting to me today was that many of the concerns that people have raised about, will people know how to, do children and adolescents and then adults know how to use various technologies in ways that are safe? Do they know how to judge the outputs that they're getting? Are these technologies making us passive? And so I think often that in the world of philosophy, we've got a lot of these answers. And they sort of the things that philosophers have cared about for a very, very long time really can help us if we adapt those practices to address some of these kinds of questions and concerns. So I'll just point out briefly 3 things that philosophers really care about. One is we love to cultivate wonder and curiosity. We like to raise uncertainty where people think there isn't any. So we'll say things like, well, really, what is friendship, right? Or what is addiction, right? There's a whole world of philosophy of medicine that interrogates the concept of disease and health. What does that actually mean? Philosophers push back a lot. Sort of no matter what you tell us, we're going to go, well, why? Right? We're kind of like perpetual 4-year-olds. So there's that. And so we cultivate wonder and curiosity and uncertainty where you think there isn't any. We love to argue and win, so I think it's really important. That's a really important skill, to know how to be told something and push back and say, well, no, and here's why. And so teaching those skills and teaching people how to look at what somebody else has told them and go, I'm not sure that's quite right, and here's why, is really important. And third, there's this concept that's been around since Aristotle's days of phronesis, or practical wisdom, practical judgment. So teaching those skills is a sort of response and a challenge in the light of new technologies. But it's a response to many, many of the kinds of concerns that we've heard about today. And so for me as an educator, what I find is that I am constantly challenged to say, how does a new group of students that's been raised with new access to new technologies or using new technologies in the classroom, how do I take what I care most about as a philosopher and as a philosophy educator, as a philosophy professor, to say, what does that mean in the here and now, and how do I get students to value that and appreciate that? And so we do a lot of very practical, sort of applied, problem-based learning in the classroom. We do a lot of reverse engineering. We do a lot of questioning and challenging and pushing back and put on somebody else's thinking cap and what would you say? And really in the context of explaining to people why it's valuable to always in the end be the one in the room who can make everybody else think you're right. That usually gets people's attention. And so for me, dealing with all of the kinds of new and emerging technologies, AI now, and all these things has been just a way of challenging me as a teacher. What do I really care about? What do I really think it means to learn? What do I want people to be able to do when they leave my classroom, and why? And then how do I make that happen? So it's made me not be able to be kind of passive as a teacher. It challenges us as educators to always be on our toes and to always be thinking more intentionally, we're back to Dr. Skelton's word from earlier today, about what it is that I'm doing in the classroom and why. And so I want to thank you all so much for giving me even more to think about, and really think about what happens in my classroom is shaped by what happens in the very early days and everything leading up to that. So it's never boring to be a teacher. Thank you. So big anything they want to add, I think we have.
I just realized I didn't answer your question, which is what I just provided a solution, which was very broad. But I just wanted to add one thing about what I'm curious about, which is what was brought up earlier, which is, okay, the technology, the reliance on technology, the overconsumption of technology, that is the outcome. What is the reason for that, right? And not, there could be other directionalities of that, but I'm interested in what is it that the children or adolescents are missing that they're getting through this? And then, of course, it's going to exacerbate whatever problem that is. I mean, that's what we're learning from this panel. But, and the how and the why of that, and then, and how do we stop it? It's very important. But psychologically, what is it that it gives someone, and especially someone navigating a really difficult and plastic part of their life? I'm still really, I think that's something we could, maybe at the next session we could talk about.
Thank you. All Well, thank you also very much for sticking with us until the end, and Dr. Alan Brown, thank you.
Let's give all our presenters one more round of applause. I'll be very brief to close this out and get us out of here even a few minutes early. So, the idea for this particular set of panels came while I was sitting at Spees Elementary School in a camping chair watching my kids play on the playground after school one day. A kindergartner at the time, who's now a first grader. And I was thinking a lot about the conversation that had been happening here in North Carolina and across the country around what should or should not be the use of cell phones in schools and in learning and in instruction and in personal spaces and in bathrooms and in places where teachers and parents can and cannot see what is happening. And as I sat there and watched my kindergartner run around and play and be off the screen, while also recognizing what Dr. Price and I for many years have sort of wrestled with, which is the fact that students learn in so many different ways and in so many different, from so many different forms of engagement, that this would be a topic that would probably bring folks from across many disciplines together. So the last thing I will share, so we have the Center for Holistic Education. This is our second year, and we are hopeful that we'll continue to do this and appreciate your support. But I was thinking about, like, people ask me when we do things like this, well, how does this connect to literacy? Like, what is literacy? We take a very broad view of literacy in the center, so I want you to think about what you've heard tonight, and I'm going to tell you how we define literacy. And think about the ways that what you heard connects. So we define, we believe that literacy entails many crucial acts, including, and there's 4 bullets here. The first is studying and cultivating intellectual knowledge among stakeholders from different disciplines. We've heard that tonight clearly. Equipping children, adolescents, and adults with the powerful tool of language to dismantle barriers in educational and social systems. Most of the conversation has been at least examining, if not considering, how we may need to reconsider certain educational and social systems. Third, communicating personal and professional experiences across across complex social identities and through a variety of multilingual and multimodal systems. Right, technology is just one system in which our children are learning. What they're learning is up to them and up to us and up to so many other entities, but it is a powerful and complex system. And then lastly, promoting learning through engagement with diverse text, authors, and viewpoints. And we've heard that tonight, but we've also see that in the types of technology that can come to bear to both support and enhance learning, while also in some ways presenting challenges. So I think this series of panels has really been wonderful. I've learned so much. I hope you all have too, and I hope you have a great evening, and we'll see you next time.